Picture this: a dark cabin somewhere in the Caribbean. The year is impossible to pin down, the candle is burning low, and a man in a faded velvet coat is staring at his own right arm. Except there is no hand at the end of it. There is a curved piece of iron, sharpened at the tip, fitted where his hand used to be. Somewhere in the black water beneath the hull, something is swimming, something with teeth, something that, according to legend, is still hungry for the rest of him. You know this man, or you think you do. Generations of children have watched him from the safety of a movie theater or a bedtime story, laughed at him, been terrified of him, and then forgotten about him the moment the lights came back on. Captain James Hook, the velvet-coated, curl-wigged, endlessly theatrical villain of Neverland, the man who loses to a boy who refuses to grow up. But here's the question almost nobody asks. Before he was a cartoon, before he was a Broadway musical, before Dustin Hoffman and Jason Isaacs and 100 pantomime actors put on that hook and that hat, was there a real man behind him? A real pirate, a real privateer, a real amputee sailing the real Atlantic, whose actual, documented, blood-soaked life somehow leaked into a children's play written in 1904? The answer is stranger, darker, and far more historically tangled than most documentaries let on. Because the man who may have inspired Captain Hook did not die in a duel with a boy who could fly. He founded a colony. He fought Spanish treasure galleons with one arm. He gave live crocodiles to a king. And his real story is, in some ways, more brutal than anything J.M. Barrie ever put on a stage. Today we go looking for the real Captain Hook, not the myth, the man. Here is a fact that will change how you watch every future adaptation of this story. When J.M. Barrie sat down to write Hook's backstory, he did not invent it from nothing. He borrowed pieces. A real amputee sea captain who genuinely wore an iron hook. A real documented gift of crocodiles delivered to a real king. A real terrifying pirate whose name alone could end a battle before a single cannon fired. Somewhere between the history books and the nursery shelf, 3 centuries of real maritime horror got folded into a bedtime story, and almost nobody who has ever watched Peter Pan realizes it. By the time we are done today, you will never look at that curved blade of iron the same way again. Before we sail any further, if pirate history with real names, real dates, and real horror is your thing, subscribe now and ring the bell, because our channel goes deeper into the Golden Age than almost anywhere else on YouTube. The man who invented Hook, to understand where Captain Hook came from, we first have to understand the strange, grieving mind that created him. James Matthew Barrie was born in Scotland in 1860, the 9th of 10 children in a weaver's household. And when Barrie was 6 years old, his older brother David, the favorite of the family, died in a skating accident 2 days before his 14th birthday. What happened next shaped every piece of fiction Barrie would ever write. His mother, consumed by grief, retreated into herself, and young James discovered that the one thing that seemed to comfort her was the idea that David, frozen forever at 13, would never grow old, never disappoint her, never leave. So Barrie began dressing in his dead brother's clothes. He began whistling the way David used to whistle. He built, in effect, a performance of eternal boyhood to keep his mother's grief at bay. Some biographers believe this is the real seed of Peter Pan. Not a whimsical story about flying to a magical island, but a lifelong meditation on a boy who is not allowed to grow up, because growing up, in Barrie's own childhood, was something death had taken away from someone he loved. Peter Pan is joyful on the surface and genuinely unsettling underneath, and that unsettling quality is exactly why the story needed a villain like Hook. Because if Peter represents eternal childhood, Hook represents everything childhood is destined to become. Age, regret, time, running out. Hook is quite literally a man being chased by a crocodile that has swallowed a clock, a ticking reminder that death is always a few seconds away, always gaining, never quite catching up until one day it will. That is not incidental symbolism. That is Barrie writing his own private nightmare into a stage villain and handing it to millions of children as entertainment. A gentleman and monster. When Peter Pan first opened at the Duke of York's Theatre in London on the 27th of December 1904, Captain Hook was not even part of the earliest drafts. Barrie originally needed a scene change while stagehands rearranged the set, and he wrote a quick pirate sequence to cover the gap. The character grew from that afterthought into the single most enduring villain in children's literature, and Barrie kept adding detail to him for the rest of his life. Here is something almost nobody remembers about the original Hook. He was not a grunting brute. He was, according to Barrie, an alumnus of Eton College, one of the most elite and exclusive schools in England, and he carried an obsession with what he called good form, a very English, very upper-class code of manners and composure that he clung to even while committing murder. Hook did not just want to kill Peter Pan. He wanted to kill him with impeccable style, because to Hook, dying badly was somehow worse than dying at all. In 1927, more than 2 decades after the play debuted, Barrie gave a speech to the actual students of Eton College titled, quite simply, Hook at Eton. In it, he confirmed that his villain had attended their school, and hinted, without ever fully revealing, at a deeper and darker backstory for the character that he refused to put into the published play. Barrie loved to tease his audience with mysteries he never fully solved. Hook's real name, his true past, the identity of the man underneath the wig, all of it was left deliberately, tantalizingly incomplete. And there is one more detail about the original production that most modern audiences never learn, because it involves a piece of theatrical tradition that has quietly followed this story for over a century. In that first production, the actor Gerald du Maurier played Mr. Darling, the ordinary, slightly bumbling father of the Darling children, and Captain Hook, the fearsome pirate captain, in the very same performance. It was not originally Barrie's plan. Another actress had been considered for Hook. Du Maurier convinced Barrie to let him take the role instead, and in doing so, he created a tradition that has been repeated in stage productions and film adaptations ever since, right up through modern Hollywood casting choices. The same actor plays the loving, safe father at home and the terrifying, hook-handed monster at sea. Think about what that means. Every time Peter Pan is performed the traditional way, the story is quietly telling you that the frightening pirate and the ordinary father figure are, in some symbolic sense, one and the same man. Hook is not some alien monster from a foreign world. He is what an adult can become. He is domestic authority curdled into something dangerous. That is a genuinely unsettling idea to build into a children's story, and it is almost never discussed outside of theater history circles. The false trails before we get to the man most historians agree on. We need to clear away the wrong answers, because the hunt for the real Captain Hook has produced its fair share of dead ends, and a good mystery deserves to show its work. The first name that gets thrown around online is Captain James Cook, the 18th century explorer who mapped huge stretches of the Pacific. The theory is tempting simply because his surname sounds so close to Hook, but Cook died in 1779 in a violent confrontation on a beach in Hawaii, killed with both of his hands fully intact. He was never a pirate, never lost a limb, and never sailed anywhere near the Caribbean waters that define Hook's world. The name is a coincidence and nothing more. The second name is even stranger. Some researchers have pointed to the legendary Barbary corsair known as Barbarossa, Redbeard, who terrorized the Mediterranean in the 16th century and briefly served as an admiral of the Ottoman fleet. He was ruthless, feared across 2 continents, and commanded genuine loyalty from thousands of men. But there is no credible historical record connecting him to a missing hand, a hook, or a crocodile of any kind, and his entire career took place an ocean away from the Caribbean setting Barrie was drawing from. A third, more obscure theory involves Henri de Tonti, a French-Italian explorer of North America in the late 1600s who is sometimes nicknamed Iron Hand in old accounts, because he genuinely did lose part of his hand in battle and replaced it with a prosthetic. The problem is that Tonti was not a sailor at all. He spent his career exploring the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes region on land and by canoe, nowhere near a pirate ship, nowhere near the open ocean, and nowhere near a crocodile-infested lagoon. His nickname is a genuine historical curiosity, but his life story simply does not overlap with Hook's. Once you eliminate Cook, Barbarossa, and Tonti, one name is left standing, and unlike the others, his biography lines up with almost frightening precision. A privateer, a missing hand, an actual hook, and an actual crocodile delivered by his own hands into the hands of a king. When pirate and patriot were the same man, to find the real man behind Hook, we need to go back further than 1904. We need to go back to the 16th and 17th centuries, to a period when the line between a legitimate sea captain and an outright criminal was so thin that kings and queens deliberately blurred it on purpose. During this era, European monarchs realized they did not need to build enormous navies to fight their rivals. They could simply license private captains to do the fighting for them. These men were called privateers, and they carried government documents granting them permission to attack and rob the ships of an enemy nation. If England was at war with Spain, an English privateer could legally seize Spanish cargo, split the profits with the crown, and be treated as a hero back home rather than a criminal. This is the exact world Captain Hook is said to have come from. In Barrie's own writing, Hook is described as a man who once served under the most feared pirate in history, sailing as his subordinate before rising to his own command, and being remembered as the only man that a fictional rival buccaneer genuinely feared. Barrie was not writing in a vacuum. He was pulling directly from the folklore, the reputation, and the terror that real privateers and real pirates had left behind in the popular imagination for 200 years. And among all of those real, documented, one-armed sea captains of that violent era, one name keeps surfacing again and again whenever historians go hunting for the true origin of Hook's iron claw: Christopher Newport. The one-armed admiral, his name was Christopher Newport. Born around 1561 in the English port town of Harwich, Newport went to sea as little more than a boy and spent the rest of his life on the water. By his late 20s, England and Spain were locked in an undeclared war, and Newport became one of the most successful privateers in the entire English fleet, hunting Spanish shipping across the Caribbean under commissions from the Crown. In 1590, Newport sailed as part of a Caribbean expedition financed by a powerful London merchant, hunting two heavily armed Spanish treasure ships off the coast of Cuba. Picture the scene: wooden hulls grinding against each other in open water, the deafening crack of cannon fire, gun smoke rolling low across the deck so thick that men could barely see the enemy they were about to fight hand to hand. Newport led his crew in a boarding action, climbing over the rail of the enemy galleon with a cutlass raised, throwing himself directly into the chaos rather than commanding safely from a distance. Somewhere in that violence, his right arm was struck and severed. There was no hospital ship waiting nearby, no anesthesia, no guarantee he would even survive the night. Contemporary records describe the wound bluntly, and from that day forward, sailors up and down the English fleet knew him by a new, grim nickname: Christopher Newport of the One Hand. Now here's the part that should make the hair on your arms stand up. Newport did not retire. He did not slink home in shame. He kept commanding ships for nearly 20 more years, and multiple historical accounts describe him replacing his missing hand with an iron hook, using it not just as a grim decoration but as a functional tool and, quite possibly, as a weapon in close combat. A man boarding your ship with a cutlass in one hand and a curved iron hook where the other hand used to be is not a subtle image. It is exactly the kind of detail that turns a real sailor into a piece of folklore. 2 years after losing his arm, Newport achieved the single greatest privateering victory of the entire war, capturing a Portuguese treasure ship called the Madre de Dios, so massively loaded with silks, spices, and jewels that its cargo alone reshaped how England thought about the wealth waiting across the Atlantic. He sailed alongside Sir Francis Drake himself. By the time his privateering days were finished, some accounts credit him with leading more raids against Spanish shipping than any other English captain of his generation, Drake included. And then, in one of history's strange full-circle moments, this one-handed former sea raider became one of the founding fathers of England's first permanent colony in America. In 1606, the Virginia Company placed Newport in command of 3 ships: the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery, carrying more than 100 colonists across the Atlantic. In the spring of 1607, they landed on a peninsula in a Virginia river and founded a settlement they named, in honor of their king, Jamestown, but it is a smaller, stranger detail from Newport's career warrior that seals his connection to the story of Captain Hook. During his years crossing the Atlantic, Newport is recorded as having brought back a pair of live baby crocodiles from the Caribbean, presenting them as an exotic gift to King James I, a monarch famous for his fascination with unusual animals, a one-handed sea captain, a hook where a hand should be, and crocodiles delivered personally into the hands of a king. If you already know the plot of Peter Pan, you can feel exactly where this is going. Hook, obsessed with a crocodile that swallowed a clock and has been hunting him ever since, waiting for the rest of the meal it started years earlier. It is difficult to look at Christopher Newport's documented life and not see the raw material of Barrie's villain sitting right there in the historical record, more than 200 years before Barrie ever picked up a pen. The Blackbeard connection Christopher Newport is far from the only candidate historians point to, and his story is not the only real horror hiding inside this fictional pirate. Barrie's own text drops a second, darker clue about Hook's fictional past, connecting him directly to the single most infamous pirate of the entire Golden Age. According to Barrie's writing, before Hook commanded his own ship, he served under Blackbeard, the pirate whose real name is generally believed to have been Edward Teach. Blackbeard remains, even 3 centuries later, the most terrifying brand name piracy has ever produced. He wove slow-burning fuses into his enormous black beard before battle, so that smoke curled around his face and made him look like something risen out of the underworld rather than a man. His targets frequently surrendered before a single shot was fired, purely because of the reputation that preceded him across the water. By linking Hook to Blackbeard, even loosely, even fictionally, Barrie was doing something very deliberate. He was borrowing the single most feared name in pirate history and quietly stitching it into his own villain's resume, the way a modern storyteller might casually mention that their character trained under a legendary, real-world figure to instantly make them more credible and more frightening. Hook did not need to be Blackbeard. He only needed to have once stood in Blackbeard's shadow. The real Blackbeard, whoever he truly was beneath the smoke and the legend, met his end in November of 1718, cornered by a Royal Navy lieutenant named Robert Maynard off the coast of North Carolina. Eyewitness accounts describe a man who kept fighting even after taking wound after wound, refusing to fall, refusing to surrender, until he had finally been cut down for good. His head was severed and hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship as a warning to every other pirate crew that might be watching from shore. That is the real shadow Barrie borrowed for Hook's resume, not a costume villain. A man whose actual death was gruesome enough to become a legend in its own right, retold in taverns and print for generations after his body stopped moving. Barrie also gave Hook one more chilling detail directly connected to real fictional piracy, describing him as the only man that Long John Silver, the infamous villain of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, ever feared. Barrie was not simply inventing a villain from nothing. He was constructing Hook as a kind of composite, built from real privateers like Newport, real legends like Blackbeard, and the era's most famous fictional pirate Silver, all fused together into a single, immaculately dressed, endlessly theatrical monster. Did pirates actually wear hooks? Here is where the story takes a turn that most pirate documentaries deliberately avoid, because the honest answer disappoints the myth. If you strip away Christopher Newport's unusual case, the overwhelming historical record shows that real pirates did not commonly wear hooks for hands, peg legs for missing limbs, or patches over ruined eyes nearly as often as popular culture insists. Losing a limb at sea during the Golden Age of Piracy was not a costume choice. It was a horrifying medical event with an extremely low survival rate. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, often with nothing more than a hot blade to cauterize the wound and a swig of rum to dull the agony. Infection killed far more sailors than the injury itself. Basic wooden and metal prosthetics did exist, dating all the way back to figures like the Roman general who lost his hand in the Second Punic War. But they were heavy, crude, expensive, and rare, and there is almost no documented evidence of a Golden Age pirate outfitted with anything resembling the sleek metal hook that pop culture has made iconic. Many pirate crews, in fact, operated under written codes that promised financial compensation to any man who lost an eye, an arm, or a leg in battle, treating serious injury less as a badge of honor and more as an insurance claim to be paid out of the ship's plunder. It is a strange, almost bureaucratic detail hiding inside one of history's most violent professions. The hook, the peg leg, and the eye patch as a permanent pirate uniform are largely the invention of 19th and 20th century storytelling, cemented by figures exactly like Captain Hook himself. In a genuinely ironic historical loop, it is very likely that Barrie's fictional villain did more to popularize the image of the hook-handed pirate than any real pirate ever did, which makes Christopher Newport's real, documented, historically verified hook even more remarkable. He is not just a possible inspiration for a fictional trope. In a strange way, he may be one of the only genuine, real-world examples of the very image that later became a myth. The world that made men like Newport too really understand how a man like Christopher Newport could go from government-sanctioned privateer to real-world inspiration for a Neverland villain. You have to understand just how thin the line was between hero and criminal on the water during his lifetime. European monarchs of the 16th and 17th centuries did not want the expense of maintaining massive standing navies, so they issued documents called letters of marque, essentially government licenses that turned private captains into legal raiders against enemy shipping. Newport carried exactly this kind of authorization. Attack Spanish ships, keep a share of whatever you seize, and the crown will call you a patriot instead of a criminal. It was, quite literally, state-sponsored piracy with better public relations. This is precisely the murky, morally tangled world Barrie was drawing from when he built Hook's backstory. A man who serves under the most feared pirate alive, then commands his own vessel, all while dressing and speaking like a proper English gentleman who attended one of the finest schools in the country. Newport did not need to be a storybook villain to be terrifying. He was something arguably scarier. A man the crown itself had legally weaponized, sent across an ocean to do violence in its name, who lost a hand doing exactly that and simply kept going. By the time Newport's privateering years ended, he had transformed from state-sanctioned raider into state-sanctioned colonizer, carrying English families across the same ocean he had once soaked in Spanish blood. The same hand, or rather the same hook, that had once dragged him over the rail of an enemy galleon would go on to help found the very first permanent English settlement in what would eventually become the United States. Hero and raider, explorer and privateer, all housed in a single one-armed man. History rarely offers a cleaner blueprint for a villain who is somehow also, in his own strange way, a founding father. The crocodile and the clock there is one image from Peter Pan more famous than the hook itself, and it deserves its own investigation. The crocodile that swallowed a clock and now ticks wherever it goes, warning Hook of its approach every single time it draws near. It is one of the most quietly disturbing details in all of children's literature, because it turns an ordinary predator into something closer to a walking countdown, a living reminder that time itself is hunting you and will eventually catch up. Barrie never fully explained where the idea came from, but it is worth noticing that Christopher Newport's documented gift of crocodiles to King James I happened in the early 1600s, almost exactly 3 centuries before Barrie put pen to paper. A one-handed sea captain, personally responsible for bringing crocodiles into England's royal court. It is entirely possible this detail survived in old naval histories, court records, and popular retellings long enough to lodge itself somewhere in the folklore Barrie grew up absorbing. But even if the connection is coincidence rather than direct inspiration, the symbolism lines up in an almost eerie way. A privateer who lost a piece of himself to violence, forever marked by an iron reminder of that day, personally delivering a crocodile, a symbol of patient, relentless predation, into the hands of a king. 300 years later, a grieving Scottish playwright invents a villain who lost his hand to a crocodile, and who now spends the rest of his fictional life running from that same creature, waiting for it to finish what it started. History does not usually rhyme this cleanly. When it does, it is worth paying attention. The Fiction Machine by the Time J.M. Barrie sat down to write Peter Pan, the real Golden Age of Piracy, the era of Blackbeard, of Calico Jack, of Bartholomew Roberts ports, and the notorious Jolly Roger flag flying over the Caribbean had already been dead for nearly 200 years. But it had not been forgotten. It had been transformed into legend, first through sensationalized pamphlets and criminal biographies published in the wake of hangings, and later through literature, most famously Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island in 1883, which turned brutal, real-world criminals into swashbuckling, larger-than-life adventure figures for an entire generation of readers. Barrie grew up inside that wave of romanticized pirate fiction, and he built Hook not as a single, one-to-one portrait of any single historical figure, but as a kind of literary alchemy. Take the real, documented horror of a privateer like Christopher Newport losing his arm in actual combat and replacing it with an actual hook. Add the terrifying brand recognition of a real monster like Blackbeard. Layer in the swashbuckling charisma of Stevenson's fictional Long John Silver. Filter all of it through Barrie's own private grief, his dead brother frozen forever at 13, his lifelong fear of what growing older actually costs a person. And finally, dress the entire creation in the manners and prejudices of Barrie's own Edwardian England, an obsession with class, breeding, and the performance of good form, even in the middle of committing murder. The result is a villain who feels like a real person, because in a sense, he is built from dozens of real people, stitched together across 3 centuries of English maritime history and personal tragedy. That is precisely why Hook has survived, unchanged in his essential terror, for over 120 years, while countless other fictional pirates from the same era have faded into obscurity. He is not one myth. He is layers of real history wearing a single unforgettable coat. The one thing Hook feared for a man who commands crocodile-infested waters, poisons children's cakes without hesitation, and terrorizes an entire fictional island, Captain Hook has exactly one weakness described in Barrie's original text, and it is stranger than almost anyone remembers. Hook is not afraid of Peter Pan. He is not afraid of drowning, or of his own crew turning on him, or even of death itself in any ordinary sense. According to Barrie, the only thing that truly unsettles him is the sight of his own blood, described as unusually thick and strangely colored, a detail so specific and so odd that generations of readers have quietly wondered what exactly Barrie meant by it. Some scholars read it as pure Victorian squeamishness dressed up in Gothic language. Others read it as something closer to a subtle admission that Hook is not entirely human anymore, that whatever remains of him after losing his hand to the crocodile is held together by something other than ordinary flesh and blood. Either way, it is a small, unsettling crack in the armor of a villain who otherwise never shows fear of anything else in his world. And it is exactly the kind of detail that horror writers understand instinctively. The most frightening thing about a monster is rarely its strength. It is the one tiny specific thing that can make it flinch. And while we are separating fact from fiction, it is worth clearing up one of the most famous pirate myths of all: the idea of prisoners being forced to walk the plank at sword point into shark-infested water. Historical evidence for this practice during the actual Golden Age of Piracy is remarkably thin. Real pirates who wanted captives dead generally did not bother with theatrics. They simply threw them overboard, left them stranded on empty islands, or killed them outright. The plank, much like the hook hand, appears to be almost entirely a product of later fiction, popularized by exactly the same wave of 19th and 20th century storytelling that gave us Captain Hook in the first place. The Golden Age of Piracy was real. Much of its most famous imagery was not. The hook that never let go the strange afterlife of Captain Hook did not stop with Barrie's death in 1937. His image kept evolving, kept being reborn, kept infecting new generations with the same basic terror. A man who lost something essential to time itself and who has spent the rest of his existence trying to outrun the clock that is quite literally chasing him through the water. Walt Disney's 1953 animated adaptation softened Hook into something closer to comic relief, a bumbling, cowardly villain terrified of a ticking crocodile, which is itself an interesting historical irony, because it strips away almost all of the genuine menace that Barrie originally wrote into the character. The class-obsessed, murderous, good-form, fanatic willing to poison a child rather than lose gracefully. Later adaptations swung back the other way. The 1991 film Hook reimagined him as a tragic, faded figure haunted by his own decline. The 2003 live-action Peter Pan gave him back his genuine menace and cruelty. Even modern television has continued reinventing him, sometimes as a redeemable anti-hero, sometimes as a straightforward monster, proof that this one fictional pirate captain has never stopped being useful to storytellers looking for a villain with actual depth behind the eye patch and the curls. And underneath every single one of those adaptations, the same real historical bones are still there if you know where to look. A privateer who lost his hand in actual 18th century combat and kept sailing anyway. A legendary real-world monster whose reputation alone could end a battle before it started. A fictional pirate captain so frightening that another fictional pirate captain was said to fear him. Barrie took genuine, documented, blood-soaked history and folded it into a story that generations of parents now read to their children at bedtime, almost never realizing just how much real horror is hiding inside those pages. Even the theatrical tradition Gerald du Maurier began back in 1904. The same actor playing both the safe, ordinary father and the terrifying hook-handed pirate has quietly survived into the 21st century. When a major studio finally broke that tradition in recent years, casting two separate actors for the two roles, it was treated as genuine news in entertainment press, because audiences had spent well over a century absorbing the unspoken message that the loving father and the monstrous pirate were never really two different men to begin with. That is how deeply this one piece of Edwardian stagecraft embedded itself into the story's DNA. It survived 2 world wars, the invention of cinema, the invention of television, and the invention of streaming, all without most viewers ever consciously noticing it was there. What the hook really means was Captain Hook based on a real person? The honest answer is both yes and no, and that answer is far more interesting than a single clean confirmation would have been. He is not simply Christopher Newport wearing a different name, but Newport's real, documented, one-armed career, complete with an actual iron hook and an actual gift of crocodiles to an actual king, reads like a rough draft of the character Barrie eventually wrote, sitting quietly in the historical record for 300 years, waiting for someone to notice. Hook is Newport's missing hand. He is Blackbeard's terrifying reputation. He is Long John Silver's fictional menace. He is a grieving Scottish author's lifelong fear of time itself, dressed up in the manners of an English gentleman and set loose on a stage built for children. That is the real trick hiding behind the velvet coat and the curled wig. The most enduring pirate villain in the English language is not one man's invention. He is the accumulated 300-year echo of real sailors who genuinely lost their hands, real monsters who genuinely earned their reputations, and one grieving writer who turned all of that horror into something a child could watch from the safety of a theater seat, never quite realizing how much real blood was underneath the costume. The next time you watch that hook glint in the candlelight, remember that somewhere in the historical record, a one-armed privateer named Christopher Newport is still out there, quietly waiting for the credit he never quite received. No statue of him mentions Neverland. No plaque outside a museum connects his name to a boy who could fly. He is remembered, when he is remembered at all, as a footnote in the founding of Jamestown, a one-handed admiral in old paintings and older ledgers. And yet, if the historians chasing this trail for the last century are right, some small piece of him has been sailing across a fictional lagoon for over 120 years, feared by children on every continent, without a single one of them ever learning his real name. That is, in the end, the strangest kind of immortality history can hand out. Not a statue, not a headline, a hook, a hat, and a shadow on a nursery wall still ticking. If this deep dive changed the way you see Captain Hook forever, you already know what to do. Subscribe, ring the bell, and drop a comment telling us which real pirate you want us to expose next. We will see you on the next voyage.